presentation from Keith Baker, the Executive Director of Reconnect Rondo. So Keith, go ahead and take it away with your presentation. And
Great.
thanks for being
Glad to be with you. I guess it is showing. Great. And I get to be the only one seeing my notes if I had any. I'm so glad to get the update from the city. You know, we consider the city an incredible partner in our work and the extension of the things that we try to do to be about community building. And so it kind of sets this off in a really important way. Because Rondo community, as we all know, is quite a diverse community today, even though historically it's been where a primary population of African Americans have lived. And so just want to always make sure that we're reaching back to try to right a past wrong, but celebrate what's currently going on and how we're all trying to navigate the current administration. And we too are being impacted by certainly the federal activities, but we do have a slight bit of good news, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you here today. When people think about our work, Reconnect Rondo, I don't think that people fully appreciate that the idea for a cap or a land bridge emerged in 2009. And that's when the Central Light Rail Corridor was going through. And as the Central Light Rail Corridor was going through, there weren't the stops in Rondo. And the Environmental Protection Act was really something that was not followed very well by FHWA or the Federal Transit Administration. And so the community pushed back and ended up suing the federal government in 2011 because those stops weren't there. And it shows the strength and the advocacy, you know, of St. Paul residents, but more specifically those that were impacted more directly by the freeway system. A couple of things that I brought with me, I'll pass them out later, and if you need an electronic version to send out to folks, happy. But the sheets that I want to just highlight is our accomplishments. It lists kind of the money that we've raised for the project to date, all of the studies we've completed, and I'll go through a couple of those here, and then further studies that we're engaged in. And one of the things that's important to recognize, and a lot of folks may not know, I spent 18 years working for the Department of Transportation. So I know the institution intimately. I managed all of the consultant contracts unit. In fact, Dan and I were just connecting up years ago because I know he was with Stantec. I don't know if you're still with Stantec. You retired now?
Well, I'm mostly retired.
Okay. So I work with all of the functional areas, including working with all of the jurisdictions that are tied to any given projects, putting together joint powers agreements, like between the city or MnDOT or the county and MnDOT, et cetera, et cetera. So I think sharing that would be helpful in your confidence that we have a good sense of how to do this. Now, the second thing that I'd mention is I spent a great degree of time in the nonprofit sector and the philanthropic sector as well, and even tied to major sports projects like US Bank Stadium. So just know that I'm coming to the table with nonprofit, philanthropic, corporate, public sector eyeballs on this. And this goes beyond just simply a structure, a land bridge that certainly sets the condition for community building. And so that's why I always say we're leveraging a transportation element for community building as the foundation. The mission of the organization, I remember when I first got involved after leaving MnDOT in 2015, the elders came to me and says, okay, is this possible? Can we do something like this? And one of the things that is important to at least share with you is the answer is yes. I mean, land bridges are not unique, and I'll share a little bit of that as I'm kind of moving forward. But we began to really hone down on the mission from this idea of a moonshot in 2009 to really saying, okay, what are we focused in on? Really reigniting the community of Rondo, creating a catalytic opportunity in the community of Rondo that can reverberate beyond just this land bridge structure. So I know it's geographically in a particular location, but look at this much broader than that specific location. The other thing that is important for me, at least to ground folks in, is if we can imagine we've got elders, we've got descendants, we've got broader residents of the area in the historic footprint of Rondo. We've got a nonprofit ecosystem that functions, whether the people are addressing housing or people are addressing other economic business development, et cetera. Then we've got each of the jurisdictions, the county, the city, Met Council, right, and the Department of Transportation, all four. So that's the eyeballs that I look at projects like this. And hopefully, as I give you a little bit of background and we're moving forward, I can let you know exactly kind of what the next steps are and what we'd be looking for others to kind of help. But when we say an African American Cultural Enterprise District, I've got to at least ask this question. This is really very rhetorical, but just reflect on it, okay? Where is a location where there is a place in Minnesota where African Americans gather and it is a full reflection of who African Americans are moving forward? You can find things like the Swedish Institute, just as an illustration, right? You can find things, the dramatic. We can find things in my hometown in northern Minnesota around the Finnish community. So even here closer, certainly the Hmong community, East African community. So we can find these places that reflect fully what community really represents. And so when we think about an African American Cultural Enterprise District, we think about it very similarly. In fact, that's what Rondo was prior to the freeway coming through, right? And so how do you restore a community that's been devastated, knowing that you've got descendants, current residents, nonprofit ecosystem trying to work hard to respond, the jurisdictions, state government, and then federal government alignment. Again, this is the way that I look at organizing a lot of the work moving forward. But it gets complicated, but we're always looking for great champions. Everyone already knows about the Rethinking I-94 project, and they're going through a process where they've identified 4 alternatives that they're going to be moving forward. And I do want to express that all 4 of those alternatives really work well with the potential of a land bridge structure moving forward, and also elevates a whole host of things that we think will be advantageous for the area and beyond. But we also know that there are those that wish to continue to have the conversation around the Boulevard project or filling it in, et cetera. And while Reconnect Rondo has an opinion about the Boulevard idea, and we've expressed that in a position paper to MnDOT more formally, we've also shared that position paper with our streets because we think it's important that certain questions get answered, and those questions really have to do with where does the traffic end up going, which we really don't have a solid understanding, except for we know they've done some work around examining it. We know that MnDOT has done that as well, but we've got a technical team of experts as well. And we just think that there are some challenges with the idea of a boulevard, but we've not weighed in one way or the other, only simply raised the questions about concerns around that. Land bridges, as I mentioned, are nothing really new. Minnesota, I don't know, anybody tell me how many Minnesota has?
No idea. I know in Duluth. Beyond that, I don't know.
All right, my hometown Duluth has one, right? But there are really 10 land bridges in Minnesota. Lowry Tunnel is a form of a land bridge, just as an example, right? We drive it all the time. Going to the airport, we've got Minnehaha, right? You get to that little bridge area on top is Minnehaha Park, right? So they exist, and they more and more exist across the country. The thing that makes this project really, really unique is that in St. Paul is landlocked. Ramsey County is landlocked. Nobody's making new land, right? So it poses an opportunity for economic development for use in a more active way. The parks that you see the picture of here in terms of Columbus, Ohio, or Clyde Warren Bridge in Dallas, Texas, or the Sculpture Garden in Washington, or in Seattle rather, these are what I call passive assets. Passive assets. They're great amenities, they connect wealthy communities, but you're not going to find very many land bridges that become catalytic assets that add something back other than just simply an amenity, right? And so we believe strongly if investment is going to happen in community, if an idea of a land bridge, 21 acres is to be created, the question really is how does it generate economic opportunity? How does it generate greater well-being? How does it generate the kinds of things that we know are important to happen within Rondo? Well, for our feasibility study, we say we can create 576 new housing units. We believe it'll attract about 1,000 new residents. We believe very strongly we can put in place a marketplace that has about 110 square feet. Okay, so now we're talking more active use of newly created land, right? That can add also value to the city, including revenue to the city. Now, this is very high level yet because we still got a long road to go. But I just think it's important that people ground themselves a bit in what the proposition has the potential to bring forward. As I said, we've done studies out of our ears. For anyone that's heard of the Urban Land Institute, globally, they're a membership organization of about 45,000. These are the kinds of organizations that are tapped by cities, counties, municipalities, states to look at problem solving. Well, we've engaged them similarly. We believe that we have to be the expert of a project in order to be able to communicate to MnDOT, to communicate to the city, to communicate to the county, and ultimately communicating with MnDOT in terms of what we think are important. A couple of things to note in particular. Anti-displacement community investment strategies. I'll touch on that a little bit. We've got a past prosperity study that tells us if we were to evaluate this idea of what equity is, one of the things that we can clearly see is that Rondo, by 18 different indicators, ranks net negative, not even at par, right? And so it allows us to take a look at what the goal is. What are we utilizing this new asset to try to accomplish and to address? And oftentimes we talk about equity and that kind of thing. And what we want to do is always put measurement to it. And so these studies help us to do that. Another important study that I just want to note here is the 4P financing model. Because that model then ultimately allows for greater community wealth building and return of investment back into the community. So I just explained. Right now, today, Rondo is exploitive. You can see the middle circle of the diagram here. And what the middle circle is really illustrating is we want to at least get to net zero, where we're not losing, but we're not necessarily gaining. But right now, the community of Rondo, we're talking by census tract information. Rondo sits in the exploited kind of arena. For those that are not as familiar with Rondo, that's Rice Street, Lexington, University, Selby Avenue. Okay, those are the census tract areas that we now know as Summit University. And I think it's important for us to recognize that what's happened with the freeway going through is it's created what we call root shock, the social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric of a community devastated after being there for 125 years, right? Establishing that fabric. So again, the question is, how do you restore a community? Does the community currently exist with any of the assets? And the answer is yes. It's got a lot of remnants of things, but it's not glued together in a way that allows for it to kind of grow and move forward with a level of viability. So this is what we call our district scorecard. And what you see is water, energy, food, waste, material, land use, governance, economics, well-being, and health, right? Now we're getting way beyond this structure. We're talking about really the outcomes and the pursuits. And this is what we think that's going to be important for us to consider. But the scorecard is a negative 30. And this is just tons of data, all right, that we're using to get a gauge of where does Rondo fit. The other diagram that you see with the listed pieces on it on the lower right-hand side, those are the 18 indicators that I shared with you: food security, water security, energy security, financial security, family well-being, heat island effect. So you can see we're really drilling down to say, okay, what are we trying to address and what do we need to put in this area utilizing this land bridge moving forward? So really expresses that we know a little bit about something. Okay, and that MnDOT and the city and the county and others need to recognize that they have policies, whether we're talking the comp plan, the county's economic competitiveness plan, the state's climate change goals. We've examined all of these policies so that we understand exactly what outcomes or the aspirations are that ultimately these strategies and policies are intended to address. And then we like to consider ourselves really the potential actualizers of the policy. Not that people aren't working hard already to try to do things, but I'll just speak for my 45 years working in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and I'll speak really segmented for African Americans just in this moment. I've seen no scalable change for African Americans in the state of Minnesota. I'm a Minnesotan. Okay? I grew up in Duluth, right? But I can say with a lot of confidence in all of the arenas that I've worked, we've had incremental success, but we've not had scalable success. And we see this as an opportunity for scalable success. But it's not just about African Americans, because if we think about how winter works, whoever's closest to the heater is going to get the most heat. The question is how much heat can we reverberate? How can we connect it to the larger ecosystem, right, that exists within the city of St. Paul, and I would argue the region. So this is something that's always hard to talk about, because what this really illustrates is where the leakage is, where we're not being very effective. And this is all scaled to Rondo. The projection for Medicaid spend just for Rondo is 57 million. All right, 22 million lost productivity due to chronic disease. I mean, this is the reality. 22 million direct cost as a result of preventable diseases. 30 million unrealized potential taxes for the city. That's just the condition of Rondo, right? So how do we take a look at our comp plan, our economic competitiveness plan, climate change goals, Department of Health goals, deeds, projections and goals, et cetera? And how do we funnel this in a way where this project can be a real innovation demonstration project about how to do things a bit differently? It's complicated. I'm an optimist by nature. There are those that goes, boy, I don't even know what you got started here, but good luck to you, right? But I do believe, because I've got a bit of experience in the way that these systems function, because there are systems, processes, tools, and resources functioning all the time, constantly. And so the question is really, how do we go about addressing that? Moving forward, I can say with great pleasure, and this is a little bit of where Dan and I kind of met, the Planning Commission, right?
Mhm.
But we've just completed and we're finalizing the writing of our neighborhood area plan. This neighborhood area plan looked at all neighborhood area plans to take a look at where the alignments are, right? So that no matter what we do, it has benefit to the other districts, right? And their small area plans. And so we're just preparing to move that area plan forward in these 6 areas: transportation and mobility, parks and open space, economic opportunity, history, culture and arts, environment and resilience, and housing. These are all tied into the comp plan. And the other thing that's important to recognize too is our anti-displacement and our community investment policies lean into this neighborhood area plan. And what we're presenting to the city is this large systems framework that help to meet some of the more specific policies that are there. The other thing that I'm going to note is the restorative neighborhood area, the restorative development plan, implementation plan for the project itself. Okay, I'll try to move a little bit quicker just so that I don't get too much into the weeds, because I can get into the weeds pretty quickly. All right, big pictures, existing condition of the area, the vision and goal process with community characteristics, as well as the concepts. And the concepts are really kind of sum up the big ideas that we've gotten from community overall. We've taken a look at that to create this systems framework in each of those elements I introduced you to a little bit earlier: culture, history, housing, economic, transportation, mobility, and so on. And what we're doing is we're establishing their direct connection to the comp plan, the economic competitiveness plan for the county, et cetera, et cetera. The standards, the policies, the improvements, and the partnerships. And this just gives you an idea of how we use that framework in looking at prioritizing pedestrian and the environment that ensure a more pleasant transportation experience, but a more varied transportation experience. We get into a little bit of improvement in lighting, et cetera. The city right now is going through its planning process to take a look at street improvements, et cetera, et cetera. But that's what we are tying into our neighborhood area plan, that's tied to all district plans that are tied to policies across the board. So I use this one just as an illustration to point you to this figure 29, history, culture, arts. These are the actual policies for the city of St. Paul in that category. So I'm just demonstrating exactly kind of how we make that connection. The one thing that's also really important is, on average, we have about 125, 150 people attend our community events. And we've been doing this over the last 3 years or so, right? So we're really grounded in the voice of community. And it's been a wide range of people participating with us. With that, I'm gonna just speak to a couple of things. We are getting ready to introduce a bill. It'll be the second year we're introducing this bill to create a Rondo Restorative Development Authority. Part one of my handouts will explain a little bit more about what it is. Essentially, it is like the Port Authority. We've had conversations with the Port Authority, with the city earlier on, because to create a mechanism, right, that can be a public-private, philanthropic, and people partnership mechanism. We all know about US Bank Stadium, right? That's a public-private partnership, 350 million. Target Field, 350 million under a public-private partnership. But we don't think about these things, these same tools that are validated, whether you like stadiums or not is another question, right? But we know the tool and its function, right? So how does the community position itself as the developer, utilizing that same system that's already been validated, but you use it in a neighborhood, so that instead of an investor or an owner taking it outside, or a developer taking the resources outside of the community, the money's cycle back into the community, really addressing some of the things that I've shared with you in terms of some of the chronic issues. So the neighborhood area plan adoption will be moving forward. We're going to be requesting at the legislature that the project be designated a demonstration pilot project. We'd also see MnDOT participating in that, as well as the city. And then we're in the process of the comment period for MnDOT at this point. So that's the update. We're moving now into the implementation after creating all of the studies and setting that foundation. And like I said, we're kind of tied to all of the policies that we think are important for communities to pay attention to in order to get some lift. So be happy to field questions.
Thank you. I think it's great. I think that the idea of the land bridge in that neighborhood is awesome, and it's space that's not utilized for anything besides moving people from one city to the other. And it's like, okay, thanks, I guess. I was just curious, like, do you guys have like any in your guys any timelines of when you actually would like to see some action start taking place? Yeah, well, okay, fair enough.
No. But I mean, your question is really important. One of the things that's critical to distinguish, MnDOT's got its rethinking I-94. That's separate than us. We're driving the land bridge project. So MnDOT's got to get through its alternatives, right? Introduce those 4 alternatives, right? Get them adopted more formally. Then it can begin to name projects. It doesn't name a land bridge. It doesn't name a boulevard. If in fact that was an option, it cannot in its process, but it can identify an alternative to consider to study further. For us, boy, we've got to get MnDOT sped up on that process. I would probably say this: the bipartisan infrastructure bill already allocates money to all states. So Minnesota's getting 6 billion, right? That's how much Minnesota's getting. It's got to distribute it to a variety of projects. And what we've got to do is lobby for our monies just like everybody else, because, there are a lot of projects out there. And so it's our hope that between now, under this current administration, and 2028, MnDOT and Reconnect Rondo can find a way to find a parallel path. But we got to get through this place where we're in right now. We're initiating our NEPA. MnDOT is in the middle of their NEPA, okay, which is really kind of the federal process for looking at impacts of projects moving forward. I told you I had a little bit of good news here. We've been hosting a national summit for the last 3 years, Reconnecting Community Summit. Yesterday, I just learned that as a result of the summit that we held in DC with 26 other communities from across the country, both rural and urban, we were able to get legislation written that puts back $30 million to projects around the country. It's a small amount of money, but it's the action of gathering folks from around the country advocating for these kinds of resources in communities. So that's one thing. The second thing is we did receive the go-ahead from this administration to move forward with our second federal grant from the Reconnecting Communities pool, which is good news because Syracuse lost 30 million, Atlanta lost 400 million. So this is a small amount of money, but it tells you that the way that we're articulating our project really is something that seems to have some attention, because we see this not only as addressing past harms, but setting conditions for the future, right? With all the things that we think are important. So 2020, 2026, 2028, I think Dan and I kind of mentioned, we're keeping our heads down, continuing the work, because at some point, we've got to be ready. We've always got to position ourselves in that ready.
Yeah, it must be an interesting thing, like when you mentioned, and that my first thought when I saw this was like, well, how is this playing with the rethink I-94? It's like, it's good to hear that at least you guys are talking to each other and like, hey, we got two projects in the same area, let's figure this out.
Well, we've been meeting with MnDOT since 2015, since before they announced rethinking, because the idea surfaced in 2009, right? So we regular meetings with MnDOT, regular meetings with the city, regular meetings with the county. I think we're reaching a particular point with the county and with the city and the policies to move things forward. We're working pretty closely with them now because we're into the implementation stage. We'll deal with the structure, the development on top of the structure, but right now we're positioning to deal with how do we improve the outcomes when it's all said and done.
There's a question in the chat. Thank you. How can a small group or individual persons get involved in here?
Oh boy, I thank you for that. Like anything else, donations don't hurt. But I would say, it's really about an advocacy, being informed as we approach into the legislature. We've been the target on occasion, been used as a pawn to get at transportation at MnDOT, and so talking with, legislators, talking with city council members, keeping them aware that you're aware of the project moving forward would be important. My sense is first quarter, maybe early second quarter, will begin to move the neighborhood area plan through the planning commission process and discussions in the planning commission. So having advocacy at the city council level or the planning commission level will be really important for us as well. And then the open comment period that's going on with MnDOT today, I really would encourage folks to get their voice on the table, support the 4 alternatives that are sitting on the table right now, and express to MnDOT, that you fully support those alternatives. Again, I know there are groups of folks that would prefer the elimination of the freeway, but that option is being eliminated. And quite frankly, I don't see it as a viable, but I get the outcomes that it's intended to try to get to. So I support the outcomes that it's trying to get to, but really, really voice support of the project that we're working on, in particular, those alternatives.
Do you have something like on your website that shows how people could get involved? Is there a place they could go to look for like information about submitting info to, comments to MnDOT or things like that, or your community meetings. Or I know I get periodic emails, how to get on an email,
Yeah,
list, things like that. Is that available, or where would people go to find that?
yeah, someone just put our website on the chat. I think if you get yourself linked in through our contact process, you'll get regular updates and newsletters. We've had a couple of articles recently about the alternatives themselves, the ones that we think ought to be advocated for. We've got a question and answer with MnDOT as another article that's there. All of our studies are sitting on our website as well. So I think you've raised an important point and question. And I think you can access information via us. If not, just send us an email. We'll be happy to respond and get you the information that you'd like.
Laura, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Thanks so much for the presentation. It's very interesting to see how it's evolved over the years. I remember going to some of the very first community meetings on it. My question is the demographics of Rondo pre-freeway was very different than the demographics of the neighborhood now. And if we're calling it an African American cultural zone, how are you picturing that? And is it kind of if you build it, they will come, i.e. come back? Is it an expectation of, creating a place where people want to be? And kind of with that is that we have many different types of African American communities these days, whether there's Somali, Ethiopian, so it's just a very different change from the 1950s. So I don't know if those items have come up or how you address it, or what are the thoughts of the community, relative to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you raised really some important points. About 28, maybe 30% of the population in Rondo are African American today. So you're right, it's very diverse. We've got a strong and large Hmong community, we've got a Romo community, we've got a Karen community, etc. And I do think that if we think about, again, from a historic arts expression, the first type of displacement that happens is cultural displacement. So the reason why we call it an African American cultural enterprise district is because we don't want the erasure, if you will, of the cultural history and expression of Rondo. But we also want to elevate and celebrate the new communities. So these communities are on the historic footprint of Rondo. So there is a way in which we ought to celebrate all of the above, right? And I think it's really critical that we do that. So I hope that's at least helpful in framing that. The other thing that I think is ultimately important is not only the cultural displacement we have to focus in on, but even when we think about the expression of the arts, the expression of music, the expression of an environment, cultural displacement has everything to do with not being able to find the things you need, right? And so by allowing for enterprise to happen, that reflects and invites, but there's one element that I didn't spend a lot of time on that I think is really important. When I talk about setting conditions 21st century, I'm talking about how do we capture carbon and use it as a source. So we're not just talking about African Americans coming to Rondo. We're talking about climate change, innovations, right? How do you address these kinds of things? And as I've mentioned to you, most land bridges are passive assets, right? Passive amenities. And if we can use the technology, whether we're talking about digital connectivity, whether we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about water reuse, all of those things, we believe that this project has such an opportunity to be a national model where people will want to know, how did you all do this? And in fact, to be honest, we are the national model already for how to restore communities, but how to utilize an asset in a more active way. Because you're not going to find this nearly the way that we're thinking about it anywhere in the country.
Thanks.
Well, the Boston Big Dig, does that have some aspects that are similar to this? I mean, that's a way longer, but it does connect neighborhoods.
But I do think that that's really a good illustration of something that really has introduced itself earlier on as an incredible value of connecting communities. I'm not certain that you can point the measurement of benefit as clearly. You can talk about it in large macro ways, job creations, right? But for us, we think that no matter what we put on this 21 acres, it's got to directly be able to be measurable in terms of its impact to those indicators, right? So there are a lot of case studies, a lot of things to draw from, and we continue to be open to learning and exploring those things.
I think we're catching up to our agenda here, so thank you so much for being here tonight.
Absolutely. I'll leave the material here for you. I thank you for the opportunity, and certainly feel free at any point to reach out. Our new offices since May, because we've been virtual. In fact, this is just a small little bit. We've been virtual since 2019, since COVID. We have our office just above Mississippi Market. Drop by and come say hi. And we've grown from a staff of 2 up until February. Now we're a staff of 9 and a technical team of 7 beginning to move forward on our NEPA work. So we're just a quiet little small little organization trying to do big things. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks so
You bet.
much.
Thanks for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Mhm.
Oh, could we also get the electronic version to Shevik too, so we can save it on our District 10 website there? That'd be great.
Sure, be happy to.
Thank you.